We have two presentations. The first one is going to be by Mohammad Aatir Khan from Habib University, and the second one by Sila Mishra. The rules are the same as before, so we'll have a 20-minute presentation followed by a 10-minute Q&A, and I will give you a 5-minute warning when 5 minutes are left. So let's start with Mohammad Aatir Khan from Habib. Thank you.
All right, thank you, everybody. My name is Aatir. I'm from Habib University in Karachi, and I'm going to present a work in progress. So fair warning, there may be a lot of questions. If there are, I would really appreciate those, because since this is a work in progress, not just in the sense that we're working on the analysis, but also currently working on the third phase to refine the model. So if you have any questions that can help us do that, so those are going to be very welcome. I'll start with a brief background. So I'll start with the background. As you've seen, all of you work in these social issues. We live in a society that is plagued with various issues. Over the last day and a half, you've heard from a lot of researchers who are trying to address some of those issues, and you face a lot of those issues on a daily basis. So that's kind of the starting point for this study as well. We see there's a lot of literature that talks about how all of these things have disproportionate impacts on marginalized communities, on youth, and so on and so forth. What all of this ends up doing is it promotes a lot of social and political apathy, right? You might have seen it in the youth, you might have seen it in adults, and that's what we're trying to address at the very core of this project. So the aim is to contribute to the literature that talks about youth as drivers of social change. There is a wide literature out there. There is multiple interventions being done, and this study also contributes to all of that. One primary aim of the study also is to raise awareness about climate change and other social issues. What we're also trying to do, like I said, to address political and social apathy, we're trying to promote civic and more community engagement, because once you start engaging on a personal level, you are able to engage more socially and politically both. What we also do is we focus on localized action and sustainable infrastructure because we want this intervention to be a starting point. Oftentimes we see in the development sector, once an intervention ends, once the project closes, nothing really happens after that, right? So that's been a primary point of consideration, and which is why we also focus on student and teacher development, right? So we want to limit the reliance on the project team and instead empower the local community so they can continue to engage in those things even beyond the project's end. One thing I'll flag at this point in time, we are in no way saying that these school students or these schools can address these social issues. We talk a lot about climate change, so we don't expect them to solve climate change. That's not the intention. The idea is for them to better understand their lived realities, because they are the ones who are disproportionately impacted by this, to make sense of what's happening, and to think about how they can mitigate on a personal and a community level. So not really addressing global warming or anything like that. Very broadly, 4 different parts to the project. We began with a test pre-pilot spring of last year. After that, we ran a summer camp to better understand the baseline of the students, where they're coming from, what works for them. And then we did the randomized control trial in the last academic year. What we are working on, starting from the summer that just passed and continuing to this academic year, is to refine that model, primarily using more qualitative metrics to see how the efficacy can be improved. So the idea that we're doing, the key intervention, is that we're going to public schools in Karachi and we're setting up civic clubs. The objective is to sort of create that infrastructure which gives students an opportunity to engage and take some sort of action. Again, not world-changing action, but small scale, what they can do for themselves, for the schools, and for the communities. The idea is once they start doing that, that will lead to more research and more awareness, right? Because if you're organizing something, even if it's a short competition, short awareness session, you will do some research on the topic, you'll learn more, you'll get more engaged with what's going on. Once you start doing things, you'll talk about those things. So there'll be a lot of spillovers in a good way when we talk about what's going on with the parents, with the local communities, and so on. We're also using public schools as our setting, so those communities are more interconnected than you would expect in a private school setting. Our hope is that this then leads to broader partnerships across different schools. So there's more collaboration, and then beyond schools as well, working with local community organizations, NGOs, other institutes that are available. And at the core of it, even if nothing else works, this at least gives an opportunity for professional and leadership development for the students and the teachers that are engaged in this project. Because obviously it then also provides this kind of exposure and opportunity for them to be able to engage. So from the pre-pilot, and I'll quickly go over the earlier stages because they inform how we do the current RCT that I'm going to focus mostly on. So we did that with 5 schools from across Karachi, and we were doing 2 things at that point in time. We would go to the schools, set up the clubs, do a short onboarding with the student leaders who would then run the club. And then in a subsequent visit, we would go and do a vegetable gardening activity. The idea being we wanted to talk about climate change related concepts, green cover, food shortages, transportation, carbon dioxide emission, and all of that through the activity. So it's not like a lecture based thing, but they're engaging in something, and then we're talking to them about all of these concepts. We used a 1-group pre-test, post-test design, and we conducted a survey focusing on knowledge level and their attitudes and perceptions about civic engagement. We observed their participation while we were conducting the activities, and then we did some semi-structured interviews with the students and the school administration. What we find, no surprise, there wasn't any statistically significant impact on knowledge because it was like a very, very short pilot. It was just 1 session. It didn't really work. What was the key finding here was that the conversation then became, okay, you've come to our school, you've done this activity, when are you coming next, and what will you be doing then, right? So our goal was to move to a format where we go do something and then they take it on. So that was missing from this model. Then we did the summer camp. Like I said, it was a 5-day camp. We were working with 40 students from 4 different schools in Karachi. And the idea here was to see what works for students, right? We did a variety of different activities in different formats. We did lecture-based sessions, we did experiential activities, we did gamified sessions, and we wanted to see what is tracking with the students. Again, similar data sources, and we did some focus groups with the teachers to see how students would learn most effectively. What we find here is, because this was a 5-day, almost full-day engagements, we did find improvements in their knowledge levels. We also found, again, not really surprising, experiential and gamified activities were better received. Students were more engaged in those sorts of things. We didn't see any impact on civic participation, which again is not surprising because the end line was at the end of the camp, which was a 5-day period, so they haven't really gone and done anything different. What we did find also was the intent to participate was higher in female students, which again lines up with the literature out there. So all of this led to the design of the actual randomized controlled trial, which we call Pilot 2.0. And again, what we're doing here is we're setting up these civic clubs in the public schools. We are working with 60 schools, 30 in the control group, 30 in treatment group. We did a stratified sampling based on total number of schools in each district. For those of you who are aware, there's 7 districts in Karachi, so we picked 3 to 5 schools from each of these 7 districts. And over all of these 60 schools, we're working with approximately 2,500 students. Here, then, what we do, again, as I mentioned, we encourage experiential learning activities, and we focus on teacher capacity building for sustainability. So data sources remain the same. We do a baseline and endline survey. This is almost a full year apart, less than a year because academic year, summer break comes in, exams come in, so we do it shorter, roughly like 9 months. And then we do a lot of semi-structured data collection, qualitative data collection using semi-structured interviews and focus groups. This is what the timeline looks like. So once we select the schools, there's 2 key interventions here. The second item, the consultative workshop. Since our focus was also on a sustainable framework, we wanted as much buy-in as we could get from the schools themselves. So in this consultative workshop, what we do is we invite the school heads and focal teachers, which are appointed by the school to be the point person for this project, to a workshop. Obviously only from the treatment group. And the idea is for us to be able to talk to them about what we're trying to do very broadly, and then get their feedback on how they think these clubs can work in their schools, what kind of variation does there need to be in the model. Because as I said, we didn't want this to be a very top-down approach. We wanted them to take that ownership, and for them to have that buy-in, we wanted them to be part of that process of designing what the club would look like. After doing this workshop, we go to the schools, we conduct baseline surveys with the students, and then the teachers form the clubs and then elect student leaders, and then they are then invited for a student onboarding. So each school brings 3 students who would be the lead point of contacts for the club, and we also invite the focal teacher along with those students. Here we focus more on student capacity development to talk to them about what kind of activities they can do, how to do that. We also give them a lot of resources. We give them templates for what kind of activities can be done. We share an online resource folder which contains storybooks on these kinds of topics, contains resources on things like SDGs and other info material. We do a midline check-in towards the winter break, and then we do an endline survey before the final exams, roughly in March, April-ish. So this is what we do. Our distribution of schools across the districts is as follows. We started with 30 schools in each. A couple of them dropped out, but we were still able to manage in terms of a good balance across both groups and across districts. Going on to the results, so we are focusing on a couple of different variables. So I'll start with the knowledge variable. We run 3 different regressions. One, a simple basic regression on the endline scores. Then we control for baseline results, and then we do a DID model. We also do a test regression using the baseline scores, and we find that there is no significant impact, but we do find results showing up in the endline result. We do a second set of variables focusing on perceptions and behaviors of the students. So in addition to how their knowledge changes, we also want to see did their attitudes towards civic engagement change based on their engagement in these activities. And then the third thing that we do, the title is incorrect here. This is essentially the skill variable. So we give a list of skills to students, and we ask them to share their confidence level on all of those skills. These include things like critical thinking, public speaking, research, and so on and so forth. So what we find is across the 3 models, for the student knowledge, we get significant results. For the section on climate change, we find their knowledge levels increasing between 4 to 5%, and for general knowledge and other social issues, we find their knowledge levels increasing between 5 to 6%, roughly. For perceptions and behaviors, the attitudes, they do positively change. We find good impact ranging between 9 to 14% depending on the model. For the civic engagement part of it, we do not find any significant result, which also is not completely surprising because obviously it will take more time for these kinds of actual impacts to be shown and for them to have their opportunity to do something beyond just participate in the club itself. For the skills, we also don't find any significant results. Again, it hasn't been long enough. The baseline was at the end of the project, and maybe longer term, we can run another survey. While we do find a positive impact on knowledge levels, we also obviously want to focus on what actually happens with that knowledge, right? Which is a longer term question that we are now looking to explore. In the short term, their knowledge does improve, but we also want to test longer term, what is the retention like? This is a few months apart, and they've been engaged in different activities over the course of the year. So it's not surprising that they are able to retain something, but we want to see how does that change with a longer term impact. What we also want to focus more on going forward is the last two parts here. The engagement or the actual participation. Their perceptions are improving, sure, but what does that lead to? Do we actually see a positive result? This is slightly difficult to also measure because if you're familiar with the context in Pakistan and Karachi, it's always not very easy to engage with any kind of civic or political activities, right? There are a lot of barriers to that. These students are also coming from public schools, so they have a different set of challenges that they also have to deal with. So that's something we want to explore more on what can be done with that. We do have a lot of implications, including for policy, which again link back to relevant literature, curriculum, pedagogy for improved student learning. We've seen governments move more towards experiential learning broadly, moving away from rote learning, and this contributes to the same. What we also find here is some contributions towards how you work with teachers. Teachers, if you engage them in different activities that that they have a buy-in for, then they are more motivated, they teach better, they work more with the schools, they work more with the communities, which again obviously leads to a better student experience. We do hope for there to be more student engagement, and we do find positive signs through qualitative data of students actually being engaged more. We also find positive impacts on student attendance. So for schools that plan activities in advance and students know that there's going to be an activity on this particular day, not enrollment, attendance actually increases on those kinds of days. The other longer term thing that we are looking to explore is how do you leverage the schools as that gateway to the communities? Because when we talk about a lot of these rural communities or non-urban communities, how do you access them becomes a challenge, and public schools can serve as that point of contact. Going forward, like I said, we're now working on a qualitative study, working with 10 schools in Korangi district to go into more in depth about how the model works, what are some challenges. Obviously, major challenges include school resources, time constraints, and those sorts of things. But beyond that, how can we facilitate, how can the government facilitate, and what can be done to sort of scale it up going forward. We also, again, are focusing on reduced reliance on the project team. So we've approached a three-phase approach. In the first phase, we do similar workshops and onboarding sessions for the students, which is very directly engaged with the team. In the second phase, we provide them offline support through office hours and research-based material that if they want to conduct an activity on some topic, we can do that research, design some activities, but they execute it on their own. And in the third phase, we're completely hands-off, and then they execute, plan everything on their own. Very, very broadly, if you're familiar with any literature on civic engagement, you'll find countries like Pakistan, broadly developing countries, they rank very low on civic engagement frameworks. Most of it also is because those frameworks aren't accounting for local context, right? They assume certain infrastructural settings. They assume certain opportunities that are available for citizens to engage in, and that assume that they're not engaging in those, but those aren't available. So longer term, we're also looking to develop a localized framework for civic engagement based on what's available, what's possible, and where do the students rank on all of that. And essentially, that's what we're trying to do with this qualitative approach. How best can we improve the efficacy of this model, and what can we do in terms of scalability and sustainability going forward? I'll just thank the the Institute of International Education for funding for this project through the IIE Centennial Fellowship Program, our implementation partners, and obviously the entire research team at Hyphen Resource Center. Thank you.
First of all, thank you for the amazing presentation. I'm Khoshal Khan from Tabad Lab, working as education associate. I am more interested in the theoretical framework through which we are interpreting these results. Can you please elaborate on this?
larger questions on dealing with the country as an contributor as opposed to bearing the brunt of larger contributors. Because we do experience climate changes, but how much of that are they able to connect the dots? I just want to know more about that. More questions for us. And the other thing I just wanted to mention, whether it would be useful to also consider including modules on perception change in other stakeholders like teachers and parents. Because one of the things that you mentioned was that you're also looking at the buy-in for teachers who want to be more engaged in setting up these workshops. So you do know that the students are mentioning that they are perceiving better knowledge awareness, and they're saying that they're saying that they're better informed on these things. But do the teachers also feel that in the classroom that they're teaching? Would it be a case to also include other stakeholders that say the marketing being done, that's in collaboration with any, whether it's community-based or another organization? Does the organization think that it's leading to it and would want to continue doing it? Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Just two quick clarification points. So one is that these are grade 8 students, right? So I'm just wondering what is the most direct way in which these students can demonstrate civic engagement? So if you could just give me an example of how you measured this, and what was your prior when you were setting up these camps? Like what are the dimensions of civic engagement in which you would expect these grade 8 students to show the most movement based on these workshops? And the second question was about, so you mentioned you didn't see any impact on confidence or skills, and I'm just wondering what kind of skills you were looking to develop. So if you could just say a little bit more about that. Thank you.
Starting with the broader framework, so the idea here that we're working with is improved knowledge is something that will help you take more action, right? If you don't know how to do something, obviously you can't do that. So I'll give you some very simple examples, and that's also true for the undergrad students that I teach, right? So if you ask them, what's your union council, right? Who is your representative in the parliament? What's the difference between local government and provincial government? These are very basic day-to-day civic questions that most of our youth does not know about, right? So that's kind of the premise we're working with. If we have more information available, then people understand how the system works, and then we give them easier ways to engage. Start at your school level. You don't have to go talk to anybody, just organize something at a school level, maybe then invite your community, parents, local leaders, anybody. What we've also noticed, mostly the schools also collaborate with local NGOs because a lot of them are already working with them, so they tie in with those connections. So we're seeing that kind of work happening, but that's kind of the broader framework that we're working with. Going on to the surveys, so the questions on climate change were twofold. Part A was focused a lot on some basic knowledge, right? So things like, do they know what green cover is? Do they know what are the SDGs? Do they understand these kinds of things? And then we also asked a lot more practical questions, things like, if it's very sunny out, should you wear loose clothes? What color clothes should you wear? Those kind of applicative things, because the idea was also for it to be very useful for them, right? Knowing how many SDGs there are, it's good for like academic knowledge. It doesn't really help you do anything. But these students are facing heat waves on a day-to-day basis, so knowing how to dress for that, that really helps them. So we had like a mix of those kinds of questions. We do survey the teachers as well. The biggest issue is of power, because depending on when we go to the school for baseline and endline, teachers might not be there in the class at the same time. So we had very few teachers who matched. But we do have qualitative data from speaking to the teachers. They do report students being more engaged in the classroom. They talk about students taking more interest, having the confidence to speak up more. And then they also report oftentimes distractions coming up in class, because even when they're not doing these sessions but teaching on like a very typical subject, students will still ask questions, which we might think is a good thing. Not all public teachers feel that way, right? Because that disrupts the lesson. So there's a little bit of that, but for the most part, we've had positive feedback from the teachers as well. We were not able to survey any parents or other community members because of lack of resources. Whenever the schools are doing these activities, most of the time we're not there, and we're not asking the schools to conduct the surveys themselves. So there is that gap here for sure. Engaging with grade 8 students. So the reason we chose grade 8 was twofold. A, in terms of logistics, it's easier. They're not very young, so it's easier to work with them, but they're also not sitting for their board exam, so they're not very overly focused on that. So it's like a good middle way. They will also become eligible to vote in the next couple of years. So we also, if we are able to do that longer term, also want to see how that changes voter turnout and those sorts of things. Again, difficult to track all of that, but that would be a good insight. Primarily what we focus on right now, like I mentioned earlier on, was things like, if you see a broken road outside your house and you want to fix it, how would you do that? Would you talk to your school? Would you talk to the local government? How do you do that? If there's garbage outside your school, who do you approach about that? So doing very basic things. So not something that is like very groundbreaking, but thinking along the lines of, how can you engage? Who do you talk to? And again, goes back to the information part. If you don't know who's responsible for collecting trash outside your school, and you're saying, the PM is corrupt because he's not cleaning up my trash, that's not their responsibility. And how do you do all of that?
Since you see effects on knowledge, right? I'm just wondering that the reason why you're not picking up effects on this is because they're just these opportunities are not presenting themselves.
Yes.
So, which is why I was concerned about the measurement.
Yeah. For sure. And which is why we're also setting the bar low, right? We're not saying, but some of the schools did surprise us, right? So a couple of them, they conducted these huge campaigns on issues. They conducted social media awareness campaigns. They conducted rallies. One of them actually marched to the local council's office, be like, there's a lot of trash in our school. Why don't you clean it up? Why don't you do those sorts of things? So they do a lot of that kind of work. There is a lot of recycling happening because I think that's also easier for people to understand. A lot of schools don't have good furniture, they don't have resources, so they focus on recycling and how can they use broken furniture to, sort of do some things DIY, engage with local partners and fix those sorts of things. So we've seen a lot of that kind of engagement.
Good project. I'm Ajaz here. And there is a green credit program by CM Punjab, and they are giving credits on projects like air, land, waste management, awareness. And can that project, like one green credit is equivalent to 10,000 rupees. Can that project be replicated in Sindh or Karachi? Do you see any relevance with your project?
So without knowing the specifics of the project, can't really say a lot about that, but obviously there is a lot of scope. So even in public schools that we've been working with, this wasn't the only program that they were engaged in. They are engaged in multiple programs through different NGOs or through the government. So I'm sure based on school district level interest, you could potentially do that, yeah.
Very fascinating project. And I think it has a very important potential to contribute to policy. And I'm only worried about the measurement part. And I was just wondering whether you can collect data on whether they are doing volunteering work either within the school. I like that you are also collecting data from teachers, but maybe we can talk later on some ideas that we have been using in other settings for some outcomes that we are measuring that may be affected by experimental demand or social desirability bias, and also other things that you can include to control potential control for that. But yeah, that's the only thing I was I'm a bit worried because everything is self-reported, and since the intervention is actually directly affecting the outcomes that you are, it's including the content that's related to the outcomes that you are measuring, then that can be a problem. But it's a very, very good project. Congrats. Yeah.
We've actually run out
so-
of time, sorry. We have a hard stop because of Juma, so we need to move to the next one. But feel free to discuss during lunch. Thank you, Aatir.
Yeah, thank you.